Now, before getting started, do be warned that there will be major spoilers in this video for the 4th episode of the Book of Boba Fett, so if you haven't seen it yet and you don't want anything ruined, it is a really good time to click away. Okay, so let me start out by saying that this was certainly a better episode overall than last week's episode. In fact, this in some ways felt like the opposite of last week, because even though, yeah, I thought the previous episode was still good, or at least solid enough, it just had some, shall we say, less than good scenes in it that were anything from they could have been better, like the Black Chrysanthemum fight in Jabba's palace, to just kind of silly or plain bad, like the slow space Vespa chase through the streets of Mos Espa. This week, however, though once again a good episode for the most part, though nothing really mind-blowing happens, most of the flashback does sort of recap things we knew had to happen, and there was a little progression of the story in the present tense. We're more or less in the exact same spot at the end of this episode that we were at the end of the last one, with prepare for war being the theme or message here. However, especially in the flashbacks, we did have several great or even amazing scenes, which is again the opposite of last week where a lot of scenes kind of just fell flat, except for everything with the Rancor. I thought that was all pretty good. But here the top one for me had to be, and it wasn't maybe necessarily the best scene in the whole series, but probably the coolest or just most awesome to behold, was Boba Fett gunning down the Swoop gang in Slave One to avenge the Tuskens they had killed. Or probably killed. Fennec does point out how unlikely it is for them to have taken down a tribe of Tuskens, which makes me wonder if we'll learn soon enough that the Pikes did it directly or helped the Swoop gang. But then again, Fennec doesn't know the whole story that they, or the gang, did have motivation to take off the Tuskens. Either way, it's an interesting line from her that might just be a throwaway line, I suppose, or maybe it's foreshadowing something down the road, who knows. Another cool scene to behold was Slave One versus the Sarlacc Pit, and the way he ultimately takes it out with a seismic charge, or Fennec actually does it, which is what I thought he was going to do in the first place, just kind of drop one in as he flies by and have a little grin on his face. I didn't think that he'd think that his armor would still be in there. And why would he exactly? I mean, he did escape wearing it, and sure, maybe that's all a bit foggy in his mind. Maybe he doesn't remember exactly what happened and how it got out. That does make sense, all things considered. But I'm still not sure what he thought had happened to his armor. Did he think it fell off while he was in there? Because if it had, wouldn't he have been dead, basically melted by all the acid? Right in this episode, it was already giving him some issues after being down in it for, I don't know, minutes, an hour. I don't know how long exactly he was down there, but he couldn't have been in there that long, and when he got out, it was already starting to have issues on his skin. And yes, I know what 3PO says in Return of the Jedi, that it takes 1,000 years for the Sarlacc to slowly and completely digest you, but quite obviously it doesn't take that long for the acid to kill you. And so what I figure here, for everything to line up and make sense, is they needed Boba Fett to think it was still in there, to have him forget about the Jawas taking it as seen in episode 1, and he was barely conscious when that happened. He just kind of wakes up for a moment and then they knock him out. And so they needed him to think it was in there so he didn't go looking for it in the meantime, so that he figures out here in this episode that it's not in the pit, which is an episode that takes place during season 1 of The Mandalorian, and then finds Din Djarin or catches up with him in season 2 and then gets his armor back. They just needed it all to line up in order to have it again make sense that he wasn't spending 5 years looking for it, because you do have to keep in mind that he does spend roughly 5 years in the desert of Tatooine, which is a rather long time, and we don't know how long he may have been with the Tuskens. It could have been a year, 2 years, and we don't know how long he was just roaming the desert, I guess, which seems to be what he was doing with his new Bantha friend. I don't know what else he was doing in that time, but again, we have this 5-year period where he couldn't be looking for his armor because he thought it was in the pit, and then when he finds out it's not, it just lines up with everything we see in The Mandalorian. Still, you'd think even if he didn't remember the Jawas taking it, which makes sense that he didn't, that he would have maybe and probably should have assumed, again, even if his mind was hazy, that he got out of the pit wearing the armor, and then maybe some Jawas or someone else showed up to salvage the sail barge and the skiffs, and that they also took his armor and left him for dead. He even says how he was left for dead on the sands of Tatooine in this episode, but let's not worry too much about that, I guess. Oh, and speaking of Slave One and what happened during that 5-year time span, did Bib Fortuna, who was obviously running Jabba's palace for that time, did he just leave Slave One there in a prime hangar spot for all that time? He didn't I don't know, sell it, or at the very least move it to get that spot back for others. Again, it looks like a pretty prime spot for a VIP like Boba Fett, or one that someone like he would get. I guess it could be that someone else was maybe using it, or maybe Bib himself was using it, that he used it to be chauffeured around in or something, even though Boba said it was a little rusty, implying it had just been sitting there all that time. Or maybe Bib Fortuna thought it was some type of trophy to display, even though he himself was in no way responsible for the death or presumed death of Boba Fett. Or maybe that's what it is. Maybe he was worried that somehow Boba had survived and that he would be back for his ship, so he just left it there. It's not a big deal either way or anything. It's a minor gripe, but I just can't help but wonder why it was just sitting there all that time like that. And yes, I'm going to keep calling Boba's ship Slave 1, even though he didn't seem to want to call it that in the episode, because at one point he asked Fennec to help him recover his fire spray gunship, which I don't know why he worded it that way. He could have just asked her to help him get his ship back and left it at that. He didn't have to call it Slave 1 or anything like that, but he didn't have to describe it beyond calling it, again, just his ship. I mean, if I ask a friend if they can take me to pick up my car from the shop, I just call it my car. I don't give him the make and model of my car. I don't describe it beyond just calling it my car. And so, not to sound like a conspiracy theorist or anything here, but this almost maybe feels a little bit of a subtle test run to see how people would react to him not calling it Slave 1. I don't know, I mean, if they really, really want to change the name of the ship that badly, if they think it's that bad for whatever reason, not to get into that discussion, and not that I like this idea of changing the name of the ship, mind you, but it is the perfect time to do it here and now in this series while Boba is sort of changing who he is and what he's all about. It would, I suppose, make sense to change the name of your ship to fit your new lifestyle or your new ways. And who knows, maybe that's exactly what's going to happen in one of these final few episodes. And going along with that, I do think, for the most part, they've done a really good job of selling the change in Boba Fett, though you could argue they haven't showed what he's changing away from in the series, especially if you're not overly familiar with the character, and why and how could you be after him only being in the original trilogy for like 6 minutes, and having a small role in the prequels as well as Clone Wars. If you go to the expanded universe, yes, there's a lot more out there about him, but really there's not much to know what he's changing from, but I'm not going to dive into all that right now. Maybe in another video I will, but I do think that might be one of the problems here. We're not seeing who Boba Fett was, we're just seeing what he's becoming. But anyway here, yes, I think they've done a pretty good job on selling us on the fact that he does realize there is strength and purpose in being a part of something bigger than the self, a part of a tribe. I believe Boba Fett could have, shall we say, had a change of heart after everything he's been through, and that he doesn't want to go back to just working for any old idiot who has the credits to pay him to do a job, but one that doesn't actually care about him or what happens to him. That's all well and good. That again, I believe that change. What I'm a little less sold on right now is the change in Fennec Shand, why that's been brought about so quickly. And yes, Boba saves her life, very similar to how the Tusken saved his. There's a connection there. Absolutely, I'm not saying it makes no sense at all, but I almost think it would have made more sense if Boba and Fennec had known each other before all of this, had worked together and earned some sort of mutual respect for each other. I was rather surprised to learn in this episode that though, yeah, they knew who each other was or had heard of each other, they're both pretty famous in the galaxy, but that they never actually met or worked together. She just seems very, very loyal and completely on board with all his ideas in a very short period of time. And Boba seems to trust her completely as well when he has no real reason to. He's constantly talking about how he trusts people to do what's in their best interest. But how does he know or believe so much in her sticking with him? How does he believe that's in her best interest? That's kind of what I'm missing here. But moving on, another part of this episode I really enjoyed and was a step up from last week was the Black Chrysanthemum fight, where he tears apart, literally in the case of one of them, the Trandoshan's. And if you don't know, Wookiees just naturally hate Trandoshan's. They're slavers. Wookiees have been enslaved by them. You see the picture. And I dare say it would have been a better introduction all around for the character, better than him showing up with the twins, then being sent to kill Boba Fett and failing miserably, only to be captured and then given away by the twins to Fett, who just lets him go. I mean, even the way the scene plays out in this episode feels like an introduction to a brand new character, the way she talks him up and tells us everything about him. And in the end, it's humorous as well that he ripped off the arm anyway after, she tries to talk him down, and Boba even says it was worth a shot. It's a really good scene, and again, it would have been a great introduction. Either way, though, I think we all kind of assumed he'd end up working with Boba Fett or for Boba Fett anyway at some point in the series down the road. And along these lines, this is very much now getting the feel or vibe of The Mandalorian, where in both seasons of The Mandalorian, basically, he encounters people and eventually puts together a posse, if you will, to accomplish some sort of goal. I feel like Boba's doing the exact same thing in order to go to war with the Pikes now. It was even heavily implied that one person he's going to seek out to join his posse is Din Djarin, or the Mandalorian. We heard a hint of his theme song at the very end when discussing how credits can buy muscle. I just wonder who else he might go and seek out. Will the last few episodes here be, or the next couple before the finale, be him tracking down some old bounty hunter friends to help him out? Some characters we know from elsewhere? I think it's pretty clear we're done with the flashbacks or flashbactas in the post-Return of the Jedi time period. We know this because, well, we're pretty much caught up. The only part of the story we haven't seen now in the series is basically the stuff from Season 2 of The Mandalorian. And we were also told that he is now completely healed from the Bacta. So hopefully this all means he's ready to truly kick a little ass now, and that, taking a guess here, maybe we will still get flashbacks in the next 2 episodes before that finale again. Flashbacks to other bounty hunters he's encountered and worked with that he's now going to recruit. Okay, and before wrapping this up, there were a few other little things that I either did or didn't like so much about the episode, or found maybe odd or left me with questions. Like Fennec Shan's little probe/spy droid. Really cool idea for sure. I just didn't know why it had to have bright lights on it, bright red lights on it, if it's supposed to be a sneaky droid. Not sure if it was more or less subtle than Maul's old probe droids from episode 1. I also very much enjoyed the chef droid in Jabba's palace and how it pulled a General Grievous by spinning its blades. I thought the Ratcatcher droid giving Boba all sorts of trouble was maybe a bit much, but I loved that he shut himself down as an act of self-preservation so that Boba didn't just kill him. I am left wondering what happened to all of Bib Fortuna's men that we saw guarding the palace. Seemed like he had quite a few of them, and one would almost think some of them would have started working for Jabba, more so than just the 2 Gamorreans that we see. But anyway, overall, like I said before, I thought this was another good episode, one that had several really cool scenes or moments. But the current or present timeline is still moving at a crawl overall, but I really think that's about to change, mainly because we're out of the flashbackness now. And I'm not sure if I hope to be right or wrong about the next 2 episodes being about Boba putting together a team before a climactic final fight in the finale. To me, that would again feel a lot like what the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian did, and I'm wondering if maybe we can get a different type of story already, or conclusion to one. Not that I think it's going to be bad. It could be amazing to see Boba Fett, Fennec Shan, Black Chrysanthemum, Din Djarin, and maybe a couple other famous or infamous bounty hunters like Bossk or Dengar, all working together to take down the Pikes on Tatooine. But again, it doesn't score all that high on originality. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this episode. Was it good? Was it bad? Was it somewhere in between? And do you see us leading to the same sort of conclusion or finale that the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian gave us, where Boba Fett is going to build his posse and take down the bad guys in the end? Whatever you think, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.